The opinions expressed in the following program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of Rogers nor Rogers TV.
This is your COVID-19 local update. I'm Deborah Hutchison in the Rogers TV studio. Joining us today is Adriana Lopez. She is a senior care expert and owner of Home Instead Senior Care in Ajax, Pickering, and Uxbridge. Adriana, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
You know, there's no debating that our senior population has been hardest hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. In Durham Region alone, just under half of all cases have been seniors. Most of the deaths have been seniors, and they continue to struggle as we get to enjoy a little bit more freedom. They continue to struggle with the isolation. So let's talk about, I guess, that continuing isolation and what we can do as a community and as family members to ease that.
Well, it's been so tough on everybody. As you said, Durham Region was one of the hardest hit, especially early on in the pandemic. And we've heard a lot of this. Families are afraid. They're unsure of what to do. It's such a new, unprecedented situation. People don't really know how to navigate this, and everybody's really trying to do the best they can for their loved ones in this time. But certainly we have some tips on reducing stress and feelings of isolation through this pandemic. One thing we would say is, again, let me preface this by saying a lot of these might be a little harder in practice sometimes than in theory, but certainly with, practice daily, we can, get to a point where these can be very helpful day to day. So the first would be practice mindfulness. Just try to focus on being grateful for the positive and for what you have. If you have a loved one who's now home recovering after a hospital stay or a change of a facility, be grateful that they're, well enough to be home and to be on their own. Find happiness through health. We can't overstate it enough. A good, healthy diet, an exercise program, all of those things, making that conscious effort daily to focus on your health and well-being goes a long way. Certainly, a healthy diet, as you know, for everybody, overall just improves your quality of life. A little exercise program, we usually recommend, 30 minutes of, some type of exercise, even be it a walk, a little bit of stretching, mobility, exercises, anything like that. All of those add value to your life. And again, it doesn't have to be anything intensive, and you don't have to do a full long 30-minute workout. I mean, you can break that down into, 10 minutes here, 10 minutes there, 3 times a day. Building a support team, really, really important in this time. Surround yourself with positive people who, are optimistic, looking through, the bright side of all of this. Focus on what is really good in your life. Another thing we would also recommend, again, sometimes tough to do. I know for myself, I've got the news on constantly, but try to limit your news intake. Select a program that, is a reliable source of information. Schedule time, watch it once, twice a day. Certainly keep yourself informed. But as we know, this kind of loop where we've got, this constant news, and it always seems to be just bad news over and over again, that can really weigh on a person, especially for a senior who's alone. And, they can get very fixated on the negative. So we try to, of course, encourage the positive. And I mean, great advice for everybody, try to laugh, a little chuckle a day, watch a funny video, reach out to a friend. You can subscribe to different things on, social media and on the internet, little joke a day kind of things like that, that'll lift your spirits. Certainly all of those things will help people, with these feelings of isolation. And lastly, of course, relying on internet and media, all of these, different platforms that we have available now that weren't necessarily available a few years ago. A FaceTime dinner with your family, those kinds of things, schedule some time to watch a favorite show like a Wheel of Fortune or something, and you can do that on video. I mean, it's not the same, but it certainly gives you a little bit of that FaceTime and some of that connection that they're also missing.
Well, let's backtrack a little. When we're talking about isolation, for many of us, my mom, as I've told you, is 82 years old, and well, we call each other every day as I'm still dropping off groceries at the doorstep, and that's it, to be extra cautious. And I'm sure a lot of people still are. So, they don't always tell you what's going on in their lives. And how do we deal with really not knowing? I guess that's where Home Instead comes in. Talk to me a bit about the services that you provide that can kind of gap that.
Yeah, one of the things early on, our caregivers were declared an essential service. We're all very well versed and well trained on infection control and prevention. Everybody wears personal protective equipment. And as an essential service, we have the ability to go into the senior home, to have that one-on-one contact. We have many clients whose families are not really able to share with us kind of what their daily routine is, what their loved one is experiencing, because of course they've been maintaining that distance. And they see them through the window, like you say, when they're dropping off groceries and looking after those things, but they don't really know the state of what's going on with mom and dad necessarily. And I'm sure you can attest to the fact that parents try to be protective of their children.
Yes, they do.
And don't always share exactly what's going on. As an essential service, our caregivers are able to go in, as an objective third party as well, see exactly the state of their home, the state of their physical well-being, their cognitive well-being, and of course able to report back to the family, so that gives them the tools and resources to be able to come up with a plan and to certainly intervene and try to help where there may be gaps.
So you say, you're trained and the full PPE. At the height of COVID, did you have trouble getting those supplies?
We're very lucky to be connected to the larger Home Instead network. Home Instead, being the largest in-home senior care provider in the world, made it so they were able to leverage resources, and they very quickly scrambled and were able to get us a repository of personal protective equipment. I know people were, struggling to get hand sanitizer. Mm-hmm. And we were able to get, a gallon of it, 3 liters of it very, very quickly. So we're very lucky to be part of that whole broader network. So it made it a little easier for us than I think for the average person struggling to get those.
Have you seen a great increase in the demand for your services?
Absolutely. And in Durham specifically, we're dealing with an aging population, and the number of people over 55 has increased exponentially. We have, people calling for parents who are 100 plus. People are living longer, they're having better outcomes, better qualities of life. So certainly, especially with the pandemic and so much isolation and people not able to see their loved ones, we certainly had an increase in demand for services.
I would think too that COVID, how it has, I guess, put a spotlight on our long-term care facilities and, the cracks in that whole system, that more and more families are trying to keep their loved ones, their senior loved ones, at home longer and independent, and aren't so quick to, I guess, put the name on the waiting list.
Absolutely. We, studies have shown over and over again that older people have better outcomes and just do better at home. We also care for older adults with living with dementia and Alzheimer's. And I can't tell you what a difference being in familiar surroundings in their own home. It makes such a difference on the progression of their disease. And then sometimes, people will progress a little slower just because they're in a more comfortable environment. They're not in an institution. And with our services, rather than people being in a facility where you're looking at, one caregiver to potentially, 10 or 12 patients, we're looking at, customizable one-on-one care that is dedicated to and driven by the needs of your particular loved one.
Let's talk about, you mentioned another thing is how to make the home safer and minimizing potential risks, so that if our loved ones are in their home, you're not constantly worried about trips and falls and the pitfalls of living on your own. What tips do you have there?
Sure, there's a few things. We always emphasize and encourage families to do a home safety assessment. And this doesn't have to be anything very formal. It's the same thing we train our caregivers when you go into a client home. I mean, even if it's the first time you've been there or the 50th time, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to, observe, look around, look for anything that you can identify as a potential hazard. And, this is not, of course, isolated to senior homes. Every home is, rife with different types of hazards. So certain things that we focus on in terms of an older client, and that would be, tubs, showers, toilets, bathrooms are, places where a lot of slip and falls happen. So we want to look at, lower thresholds where you can step into a shower as opposed to having to step over a tub. Handrails, we highly encourage handrails, makes a huge difference. Even with toilets, try to have ones that are a little bit higher off the ground. It's easier for, a person to get up and down, especially, if they've got mobility issues, they're suffering from anything like arthritis, those types of things. Another one that we see big is thresholds. It might not seem a lot to somebody who's very able-bodied or very young, but oftentimes we have seniors who, are dependent on walkers, wheelchairs, and we find thresholds, even a difference of about 6 inches makes it very, very difficult for them to navigate. So we want to be mindful of those things and perhaps look at things like, temporary ramps or something like that would help them navigate those. Stairs are a big one. You'll find, sometimes handrails just on one side, it's not sufficient for people to be able to balance their weight and manage the stairs safely. Rugs on stairs also can be a tripping hazard, as can poor lighting. A lot of stairwells, fairly dimly lit. And, the last thing you want is somebody trying to navigate a stairwell, taking a fall. That could be very, very serious, as you can imagine, for anybody, especially for a senior. Floors, we all love, our hardwood floors transitioning into lovely, lush carpet, which seems, aesthetically very pleasing. It can be very nice in a home. But for a senior can absolutely be a tripping hazard. Like I said, especially if you're navigating with a walker or a wheelchair, just that little difference in uneven floor surfaces and that transition can be very dangerous. So we want to be mindful of those things. If you're going to have rugs in the home, we always recommend make sure that they are rubber backed so that they have some traction to them. They're not going to slip out from under somebody's foot. Other very low cost things that you can do, you don't have to do a big renovation of your house. Anti-skid traction strips, the kind of peel and stick, you can get them at your local hardware store. You can put those down, makes a big difference, especially on outside surfaces. Summer sadly looks like it's coming to an end soon. We'll have, more inclement weather. The potential for slip and falls outside, of course, greater. Those make a big, big difference. And finally, the big one we emphasize is lighting. I can't tell you how many places are very dimly lit, and it's difficult, to see and to progress, down hallways. I always find that the longest corridor tends to be from a main living area to a bedroom where people are navigating, or to a bathroom where they're navigating quite frequently, and they can be very dimly lit. So we would recommend LED bulbs. A simple switch. They're much brighter, longer lifespan on them. And overall, really, it's a cost savings. A little pricier up front, but certainly in the long run, will save you some money.
Okay, Adriana, thanks so much. I have to stop you there. We're going to take a quick break. More to come after this.
When you're online, Rogers TV on YouTube shares news and events from your community, like messages from local leaders, updates on the latest health news, local business presenting their new offerings, and how our local communities are working their way through these unprecedented times. Visit and subscribe to Rogers TV on YouTube for the latest local information.
And welcome back to Local Update. You know, most fires in Ontario occur in the home, the one place where most of us feel the safest and the one place we've been asked to spend the most time in during this pandemic. Joining us now is Oshawa Fire Chief Derrick Clark with some important information and tips on how to reduce the risks of fire in your home. Chief, welcome to Local Update.
Thank you for having me, Deborah. Happy to be here.
Now, during the pandemic, of course, people have been spending all, if not most of their time at home. And you've seen a real spike in the number of calls since then, have you not?
Yeah, that's correct, Deborah. And it's a concern for me and the management team here in the city as well, because since COVID, around March, we've been tracking some of the statistics to try and relate it to COVID. We've seen about $5 million in property damage. We've had one fatality. We've had numerous family pets perish. We've had 9 people transported to the hospital and treated, 2 in serious condition. We had one fire alone where we had 6 people transported to hospital. And we see a reoccurring theme of, fires caused by smoking materials, electrical, cooking. So those 3 things all tailor to what you were talking about earlier with people staying at home due to COVID.
Yeah, and fires, that's not all you do. Of course, your people respond to medical emergencies as well, yet it's the fire where you see the most injury.
Correct. Medicals are our largest call volume in the city of Oshawa. 26% roughly of our calls are medicals. Fires are only somewhere around 4% or less. But it's the devastation of a fire that causes so much destruction and havoc and changes people's lives. So it's an important thing for us to stay on top of fire safety and make people aware of what they should be doing in the event of a fire and how quickly fires escalate.
Well, let's talk about that. We also have some video we can show. Let's talk about how quickly that fire spreads.
Well, and this is a great conversation because, from my end, I'm sorry I can't see if the video is rolling, but if the viewers are watching the video and seeing just how fast that fire in our video we're demonstrating it builds, they'll see the gases at the top of the screen of the house that we built are collecting, and they're all black and they're starting to build down. In a fire in an enclosed bedroom or kitchen or a room in a house, which all our houses are all R220, totally sealed and insulated houses now. There's not a lot of ventilation. The fire builds rapidly. And I think it's important for our viewers to understand that, it takes about 10 minutes for the fire department to get on scene, regardless if we're around the corner or not, because some things have to happen. There has to be, while you see this fire burning, someone has to detect the fire. So the fire is detected, that takes time. The fire has to be reported, that takes time. Then it has to go through our dispatch center. They have to get the trucks going. There's a turnout time and a travel time involved. Then our officers will get on scene and assess it and come up with a quick action plan. All that takes about 10 minutes. And you can probably see in that fire, you're not going to last or survive for 10 minutes. So the key there, fire safety and early detection, getting out of the residence as quick as possible.
And of course, in early detection, your smoke alarms, you have to have working smoke alarms, and you have to have them on every level of the house and outside your bedrooms, correct?
Absolutely. And the law requires it that you have to have working smoke alarms on every level and outside sleeping areas. Some of the newer codes now are even within the sleeping areas as well. And you also have to have a CO alarm if you have fossil burning appliances or if you have attached garage. And again, CO can be just as deadly as smoke as well. And that's why they call it the silent killer. Smoke and CO alarms are vital, and that early detection is vital. So batteries have to be checked constantly. For landlords that are renting out, whether it's a townhome or a 2-unit apartment or whatever, they have to be responsible to make sure those tenants have working smoke alarms and that they're not being removed or batteries taken out. As silly as it may seem, we still see a high percentage of our calls without working smoke alarms. So it's something that we're going to keep pounding home the message until we have every home in the city of Oshawa safe.
Now, of course, some smoke alarms are, I guess, directly wired into the homes, but you should check to make sure you have a working battery backup, correct?
Correct. All those smoke alarms do have a working battery backup, and if the power should go out, that's why those batteries are there, to keep those smoke detectors working continuously. So yeah, great point, vitally important, and to make sure there's continuous power to those units as well. And if you take, and some people, because they're all wired in series, they'll take them down if they're cooking. You should never do that. If you're having concerns with your smoke alarms, call the fire department. We have great resources here. We can talk to you and give you direction and help you out.
That is a good point there, because I don't know how often I cook and it's like, oh yeah, mom's cooking, there goes the smoke alarm again. And a lot of people will get frustrated, and I'll just take it out for now.
I know, and it's the problem and then you forget and you get busy. I know our lives are all busy. I know I'm busy. We get absent-minded. So we really promote not to tamper with those smoke alarms and look at other options, better ventilation.
Now, they also have an end of life to these smoke alarms and CO detectors too, correct?
Correct. 10 years, we tell people after 10 years you need to replace it. And there'll be a sticker on the smoke alarm that will indicate the end of life. And again, the batteries, we're recommending twice a year if you can change the batteries, and that way you're always safe.
There was a time, and I guess with the pandemic, that's kind of fallen by the wayside, where, firefighters, you had programs where you went door to door and offered to check smoke detectors.
Yeah, our Alarm for Life program, unfortunately, COVID, and we're not indicative of anybody else in the world. Our way of doing business has changed. So we're looking at some ways now where we can get back out in the community. Now that we're into, opening up into stage 3, things are easing up a little bit, but we weren't able to obviously go into homes because of the fear of COVID and protection of our workers. And, it's paramount that we protect our workers and also the citizens. We don't want to pass on anything to them. So we're looking at revamping that program to get our crews out. But again, we want to be very careful. We want it to be safe for our crews and safe for the residents.
Well, let's talk about safety during this pandemic for your crews. I have to ask you, how everyday life has changed for your firefighters in regards to PPE and taking extra precaution.
Yeah, we've put an extraordinary amount of time and effort into making sure our firefighters are safe and preparing them with the proper PPE. And we've updated different avenues of our PPE where, we have fully encapsulated masks that they can wear when responding to a positive COVID call. We have the proper PPE in place working with Durham EMS. We've had a really great relationship at the fire chief level with all Durham regional paramedics, all the fire chiefs, and we've kind of worked in unison to make sure all our staff are safe. We've had the same issues as everyone else. It's been a struggle to get PPE, but I think the management team here and the admin staff here have done a tremendous job to keep our folks safe and have the proper PPE. And we're working to make sure we stockpile it so this doesn't happen again.
Right. As sure as can be, Officials are already talking about a second wave. So do you feel that your service is prepared should that happen?
We are prepared, and we learned a lot from SARS a few years ago, and we expanded on what we learned from SARS, and we instituted it into the COVID protocols. But we are prepared. We're prepared for the next, if there is a next wave. I do want to point out one thing on an emergency management level. I think, and it's important for the viewers, the mayor of the city of Oshawa and the team here has done an amazing job. And I think in Durham, they've done a very comparable job throughout. And that's why our cases have been controlled here. And I think the residents are buying into the advice, and you can see what's happening around the world where they're not. So we've done a great job in Durham, and our residents have done a great job. And I think if we keep on that track, we're going to be okay.
Well, especially with COVID happening, I'm just wondering if you find a reluctance on behalf of some people to call you if, let's say, they think their CO detector goes off and these things malfunction. People might be a little hesitant to call if that happens and just put it off to a malfunction, but they shouldn't.
No, and you're absolutely right, Deborah. They should never hesitate to call. That's why we're here. We're a service in the city of Oshawa, and we're here to serve the residents in any way, shape, or form for fire service or public education. And that's a good segue. We have so many resources available for staff here, whether it's if they want to know about cooking safety, electrical safety, dryer hookups, smoke seal alarms, as you mentioned earlier, just fire safety in general. Even people living in apartment buildings, they can call. We will give them information. We have a ton of resources available, and they can speak with a fire prevention officer, and hopefully we can answer all your questions.
Okay, we've only got about 2 minutes left. So let's talk about some of your top tips for preventing fire.
Well, the three big culprits, as I said, smoking, electrical, and cooking. So smoking, what we're seeing is we've seen a real increase in people smoking, and then they think they're responsible by putting their cigarette butts out in just planters or boxes that have peat moss and stuff in them. That's a really bad idea, because what happens is you go in the house, those things smolder, and while you're sleeping, your front porch catches on fire, and eventually the house. So discard smoking materials, and we suggest tin cans with water. That way you're safe. Cooking, never leave anything unattended on the stove. I know we want to run out sometimes and talk to our neighbor, but just shut the stove off if you're going to leave it, or stay there until it's done. And then electrical, don't run extension cords, and buying extension cords that aren't CSA approved. I know a lot of people may go to a dollar store and buy those are really dangerous because they're not CSA approved and they don't have the proper insulation. Things like you never run extension cords underneath carpet or over top of furniture. Those will all cause fires eventually.
And I like this one. When you're recharging a electrical device, make sure it's on a hard surface, not on your bed and not on your carpet, correct?
And that's a great idea. And I have two girls and a boy, and I constantly used to go after them because they would have their laptops on the bed, and that's where we get into trouble. We've seen a few fires from charging laptops on bedding surfaces.
Chief Clark, I'm going to have to stop you there. We are out of time. Thank you so much for joining us. And on behalf of all of us here at Rogers TV, thanks to the viewers for joining us. Until next time, I'm Deborah Hutchison. Stay safe, everyone.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.